I woke up in a hospital bed with my arms empty, and for 3 full seconds, I couldn't remember why that felt wrong. Then the fog cleared just enough, and I understood. Nora, my daughter, born 11 hours earlier, and she wasn't in the basement beside my bed where she was supposed to be. Where is she? Where is my daughter? I pressed the call button, my hand shaking, the 4-line pulling uncomfortably against my skin as I tried to sit up too fast. A nurse appeared within a minute, calm, professional, telling me my daughter had been taken down the hall for a few routine checks with your family, her voice carrying the kind of easy reassurance that usually would have settled me. It didn't settle me. Something underneath the medication fog was already sounding an alarm I couldn't quite name yet. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories about family secrets, unexpected justice, and moments when people finally face the consequences of their choices, make sure you subscribe to StorySpark. And stay with me, because what happened next changed this family forever. I had no idea, lying in that hospital bed with my heart pounding faster than my body could keep up with, that somewhere down that same hallway, my father and my brother's wife were putting the final pieces of a plan into motion, one that had almost nothing to do with routine checks, and everything to do with a decision none of them had any right to make without me. My name is Abby Kessler. I grew up in Kenosha, Wisconsin, the younger of 2 kids raised by my father, Roger, and my mother, Marilyn, in a house where my older brother Tyler's happiness always seemed to matter just slightly more than mine, not through anything anyone ever said directly, but through 1,000 small decisions that added up, over 30 years, into a pattern I understood better than I wanted to. Tyler married his high school sweetheart, Jenna, when they were both 24, and for the better part of a decade afterward, the 2 of them tried desperately to have children of their own. 3 miscarriages, 2 failed rounds of IVF that drained their savings and, I think, some essential piece of their hope along with it. My parents grieved every single loss with them, openly, completely, in a way I understood and never once resented. Their pain was real. I never doubted that. What I doubted, eventually, was how far my father was willing to go to end it. I built my own life quietly during those years, the way I'd learned to build most things in that family, without much fanfare. I trained as a paralegal after community college, eventually landing a position at a family law firm in Kenosha specializing in guardianship and custody cases, work I found genuinely meaningful even when it meant sitting through some of the hardest days of other families' lives. I spent years learning exactly how guardianship transfers are supposed to work, and exactly how they're not. I met my husband, Sean, at that firm's holiday party 3 years ago, an ER nurse at the hospital across town, steady and kind in a way that made the quieter parts of my personality feel like strengths instead of something to apologize for. We married 2 years later, and when I got pregnant last spring, my father's joy for us felt, for the first time in a long while, uncomplicated. I should have paid closer attention to how complicated it actually still was. My delivery, 3 days before I woke up in that hospital bed, had been harder than anyone expected. A sudden drop in Nora's heart rate during labor led to an emergency C-section, followed by a post-surgical complication that required heavier sedation than my birth plan had ever accounted for. I remember pieces of those first hours after delivery, Sean's face close to mine, Nora's tiny weight against my chest for a few precious minutes before medical staff needed to run further tests, and then long stretches of fog where time moved strangely, medicated and slow. I remember signing something. I remember someone's hand guiding mine across a page. I don't remember what it said. That memory surfaced slowly as I lay in that hospital bed, the nurse's reassurance about routine checks, still not fully settling the alarm building in my chest. I asked her carefully whether my husband was with Nora right now. I believe your father and sister-in-law are with her, she said. Your husband stepped out about 20 minutes ago. I think he mentioned needing to speak with the hospital's patient advocate about something. Sean's talking to a patient advocate. That's not a routine check kind of conversation. Something cold moved through the fog in my chest, sharpening it into something closer to clarity than I'd managed since waking up. I pressed the call button again, asking the nurse, as steadily as I could manage, to please bring my daughter back to my room immediately. Of course, she said, already turning toward the door. Let me go check on that for you. She didn't come back right away. 10 minutes passed, then 15, each one stretching longer than the last, my heart rate monitor beeping slightly faster than it had when I first woke up. I reached for my phone on the bedside table, hands still unsteady, and found a text from Sean sent 12 minutes earlier that I somehow hadn't heard arrive. Abby, don't sign anything else. I'm handling this. I love you. Stay calm. Don't sign anything else. What does that mean? What did I already sign? I was still staring at that message, my mind racing through medicated, incomplete memories of the last several hours, when my hospital room door finally opened. It wasn't the nurse. It was my father, Roger, stepping in with an expression I'd never seen on him before, careful, rehearsed, the look of a man walking into a room already bracing for a fight he'd hoped to avoid having. Abby, sweetheart, he said. I need you to stay calm. Everything's fine. We just need to finish handling one more thing before Nora comes back to you. One more thing. Finish handling. Dad, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Where is my daughter? He hesitated, just long enough that the cold feeling in my chest turned into something closer to real fear. She's with Jenna, he said. Abby, listen to me. Jenna and Tyler have been through so much these last few years. And you and Sean, you're young, you're healthy, you can have more children whenever you're ready. Your mother and I have been talking, and we really believe this is the right thing for this family. The right thing. He's not talking about a hospital visit. He's talking about something much bigger than that. Dad, I said, my whole body suddenly, completely awake despite the medication still moving through my system. What did you make me sign? He didn't answer right away, and in the silence that stretched between us, I understood, with a clarity sharper than anything the medication had allowed me all day, exactly how much trouble my daughter and I were actually in. We just need one more signature, he finally said, his voice quiet, almost gentle, like the words themselves might soften what he was actually asking. And then it's done. I stared at my father for a long moment, the words "and then it's done" echoing in a way that made my whole body go cold. Done. He's talking about a guardianship transfer. He's talking about giving my daughter to my brother. Get out, I said, my voice shaking now, adrenaline finally burning through whatever fog the medication had left behind. Get out of my room right now, and bring my daughter back to me immediately, or I swear to God, Dad, I will call hospital security myself. He flinched, genuinely startled by the force in my voice. I don't think in 30 years I'd ever spoken to him that way. But he didn't move toward the door. Abby, please, just let me explain. You don't get to explain anything until my daughter is back in this room, I said. Now. Sean arrived less than a minute later, practically running, a hospital patient advocate named Diane Whitmore close behind him, her expression carefully neutral in the specific way I recognized from my own work, the professional calm of someone who had walked into the middle of something serious and needed to assess it clearly before reacting. Abby, Sean said, crossing the room to my bed immediately, taking my hand. Nora's fine. She's safe. She's actually with the nursing staff right now, not with Jenna. I made sure of that the moment I realized what was happening. He already knew. He's been fighting this for the last 20 minutes while I was lying here confused. What happened, Sean? I said. Tell me everything. Right now. He explained it as clearly as he could, his own voice tight with barely controlled anger. While I was still deeply sedated after surgery, my father had approached me with what he described to hospital staff as routine discharge paperwork, guiding my hand across a signature line while I drifted in and out of consciousness. What I'd actually signed, according to a document Sean had since retrieved a copy of, was the first page of a private guardianship agreement, drafted, apparently, by a facilitator my father had contacted weeks earlier, transferring temporary legal custody of Nora to Tyler and Jenna, framed as family support during a difficult recovery period. Weeks earlier. He'd been planning this before I even went into labor. There's a second signature required to finalize it, Sean said. That's what he was trying to get from you just now. The facilitator apparently told him informal guardianship agreements like this sometimes get treated as valid if both parties sign willingly, even without full court oversight, especially if nobody challenges it right away. That's not remotely how guardianship law actually works, and any facilitator worth trusting would know that. Diane Whitmore stepped forward carefully. Mrs. Kessler, I want to be very clear with you. Nothing legally binding has been finalized. Hospital records show your signature was obtained while you were under active post-surgical sedation, which raises serious questions about consent and capacity. I've already flagged this internally, and I'd strongly recommend you contact an attorney immediately. I don't just need to contact an attorney. I need to talk to my own firm. I called my supervising attorney, Patricia Nowak, from that hospital bed less than 20 minutes later, my hands finally steady enough to hold the phone properly. Patricia had handled contested guardianship cases for over 15 years, and I'd assisted directly on at least a dozen of them myself, filing exactly this kind of paperwork, cross-referencing exactly this kind of consent question. I know exactly what needs to happen here. I've just never had to do it for my own life before. Abby, Patricia said, her voice sharpening the moment I finished explaining, a signature obtained from someone under post-surgical sedation, without independent legal counsel present, isn't going to hold up to any real scrutiny. But we need documentation immediately. Medical records showing your sedation levels at the time of signing, and ideally something showing intent, because informal agreements like this sometimes get contested in messier ways than the paperwork alone would suggest. Intent. I need proof of what my father actually intended to do, beyond just the document itself. If you were in her position, would you protect your family, or fight for what's rightfully yours no matter what it cost? Tell me what you would do in the comments. And if you're invested in this story, subscribe to Story Spark, because the next revelation changes everything. Jenna came to my room alone that evening, after Nora had been safely returned to me, after hospital security had quietly asked my father and Tyler to wait outside pending a formal review of the situation. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, red-eyed, her hands twisting together nervously in front of her. Abby, she said, I need you to understand something. I never wanted to hurt you. Tyler and I have wanted this for so long, and your father kept telling me this was the answer, that families take care of each other, that you'd understand eventually even if it was hard at first. She actually believed that. She actually let herself believe taking my daughter counted as family taking care of each other. Did Tyler know? I asked. Her face crumpled. No. He has no idea, Abby. Your father told me not to tell him yet. He said it would be easier for Tyler to accept it once it was already done. My father was planning to present my brother with a stolen niece as a fait accompli, and Tyler had no idea any of this was happening at all. I sat with that revelation for a long moment, feeling something shift inside me, not less angry exactly, but angry now at a wider, more complicated target than I'd expected. My father hadn't just betrayed me. He'd manipulated a grieving, desperate woman into believing something monstrous was actually an act of love, all while keeping his own son completely in the dark. This is so much bigger than one signature on one hospital form. Sean found me staring at my phone later that night, Nora finally asleep in the bassinet beside my bed where she belonged, and he sat down carefully on the edge of my bed, exhaustion written across his whole face. I recorded a video earlier, he said quietly. Right after Nora was born, before all of this happened. I wanted to send it to my mom, and get her first cries on camera. I never actually sent it. Everything happened so fast after that. A video from right after delivery. Before any of this started. Play it, I said. He pulled up the file, hitting play with his thumb, and for the first 10 seconds, it was exactly what I expected. Nora's tiny, furious first cries, Sean's voice soft and amazed in the background, my own groggy, exhausted laugh somewhere off camera. Then the video kept recording, the way videos sometimes do when nobody remembers to press stop, capturing several minutes of the hospital room after the camera had been set down on the bedside table, still filming the ceiling, still recording every word spoken nearby. And there, clear and unmistakable in the background audio, were two voices I recognized immediately. My father and Jenna, speaking quietly near the door, believing nobody was listening. Once she signs the second page, it's done. Tyler doesn't need to know how it happened. He just needs to know he finally has a daughter. I stared at the screen, Sean's hand tightening around mine, both of us understanding in that single moment that the video accidentally still running on his phone had captured the exact conversation that proved everything. Not carelessness, not a misunderstanding, but a deliberate, premeditated plan. One button. He pressed record to capture Nora's first cries, and it ended up capturing the truth about exactly what my father was planning to do to us. I called Patricia back that same night, my voice steadier than I expected given what I'd just heard, and told her about the recording. "Send it to me immediately," she said. "Abby, this changes everything. This isn't just a consent question anymore. This is documented evidence of premeditated intent to fraudulently obtain guardianship. Depending on how the facilitator your father hired is licensed, this could also expose them to serious professional consequences. This is real. This is actually legally real, not just a family argument that gets smoothed over at Thanksgiving." I didn't sleep much that night. Nora's small sounds from the bassinet, the only thing keeping me tethered to something calm in the middle of everything else churning through my mind. By morning, Patricia had reviewed the recording, confirmed with hospital counsel that my signature obtained under sedation held no legal weight regardless of the second page's status, and formally notified the guardianship facilitator's licensing board about the circumstances under which the document had been drafted and executed. He thought this would just quietly happen, and by the time I understood what was going on, it would already be too late to undo. He had no idea I spent years learning exactly how to undo something like this. My family gathered in a small hospital conference room 2 days later. My parents, Tyler, Jenna, Sean, and me, Nora sleeping soundly in a carrier beside my chair, Patricia present as my attorney rather than simply my supervisor. My father looked older than I remembered him looking just a week earlier, the careful confidence from that hospital room doorway completely gone. "I want to understand something first," I said, before anyone else could speak. "Tyler, did you know about any of this?" My brother's face, already pale, went whiter still. "Know about what? Dad, what is she talking about?" He really didn't know. Whatever else happens in this room, at least that part is true. I nodded to Sean, who played the recording on his phone, the room falling into complete silence as my father's voice filled the space. "Once she signs the second page, it's done. Tyler doesn't need to know how it happened." Tyler stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped backward. "Dad, what did you do?" My father sat very still for a long moment before he finally spoke, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I watched you and Jenna lose 3 pregnancies," he said, looking at Tyler. "I watched 2 rounds of IVF drain everything you had, financially and emotionally, and I watched you both slowly stop believing you'd ever get to be parents. I couldn't fix that. I've never been able to fix that, and it's eaten at me for years." His voice cracked. "When Abby got pregnant, some part of me, I know how this sounds now, hearing it out loud, some part of me thought I could finally fix it. That Abby was young, that she could have more children, and that Nora could give your family the thing you'd wanted for so long." He genuinely believed he was solving something. That doesn't make what he did any less devastating. "You decided that," I said, my voice shaking with an anger I'd been holding steady for 2 days, "without asking me. You manipulated Jenna into believing this was some act of family love instead of something you knew, deep down, I would never agree to. You obtained my signature while I was sedated after major surgery, Dad. Do you understand what that actually is? That's not a family taking care of each other. That's fraud." My mother spoke for the first time, quiet, devastated. "Roger, how could you not tell me? I would never have let this happen." Even my mother didn't know the full extent of it. He kept this compartmentalized enough that nobody could stop him in time. Jenna, sitting beside Tyler, finally looked up, tears streaming freely now. "I'm so sorry," she said, looking directly at me. I let myself believe something because I wanted it to be true so badly. That doesn't excuse it. I know that now. I should have said no the moment your father brought it to me. Tyler turned to his wife, his own voice breaking. You knew. You actually agreed to this without telling me. I'm sorry, Jenna said again, quieter now. I'm so sorry, Tyler. Patricia stepped in carefully, her professional tone cutting through the raw emotion filling the room. I want to be clear with everyone here about where things stand legally. The guardianship document has no binding effect. The signature was obtained under conditions that void consent entirely, and hospital records confirm the sedation timeline. I've also filed a formal complaint with the licensing board regarding the facilitator who drafted this agreement, given the clear evidence that he proceeded despite obvious red flags about consent. She looked directly at my father. Mr. Doyle, depending on how this proceeds, you could potentially face civil liability and possibly criminal exposure depending on how the district attorney's office chooses to view the circumstances. I'd strongly recommend retaining your own counsel. This isn't a threat. This is simply what happens when you try to take a newborn from her mother through deception. The consequences were always going to be real, whether he understood that going in or not. What happened over the following months unfolded slower than that single devastating conversation in the hospital conference room, but it unfolded with a kind of clarity that mattered more than speed. The district attorney's office ultimately declined to pursue criminal charges against my father, citing the document's non-binding status and the absence of any completed transfer, though the assistant DA who reviewed the case made clear, in a private conversation with Patricia, that the decision had been close, and that a completed second signature would likely have resulted in a very different outcome. He came closer to actual criminal exposure than he probably understood in that hospital room. Some acts of desperation only avoid real consequences by inches. The facilitator my father had hired lost his license within the year. His conduct in this case, cited alongside 2 other complaints the licensing board's investigation eventually uncovered. My father paid for an attorney of his own, faced a formal civil demand letter from Patricia's firm that required him to sign a legally binding acknowledgement that he would never again attempt to obtain guardianship or custody rights over Nora without my full, freely given consent, and quietly, painfully, began the much slower process of trying to rebuild trust with both his children. Tyler and Jenna separated for several months afterward, though they eventually began attending counseling together, working through not just the desperate grief of their infertility struggles, but the deeper question of how far either of them had been willing to let that grief carry them. I don't know, even now, exactly where their marriage will land. I know Tyler calls me sometimes, quietly, just to check on Nora, careful never to overstep the boundary that conversation now requires. He lost something too, in all of this. Just not the thing my father was trying to give him. My relationship with my father remains complicated in a way I don't think will ever fully resolve. He's asked more than once to see Nora, and I've allowed careful supervised visits, watching him closely in a way I never imagined I'd have to watch my own father. He's never again attempted anything close to what he tried that week, and there's been, slowly, something resembling real remorse in how he's shown up since, not enough to erase what happened, but enough that I haven't fully closed the door on whatever relationship comes next. Protecting my family from him doesn't mean cutting him out completely. It just means I finally understand exactly how much supervision that relationship actually requires now. I think sometimes about that recording, a video meant to capture nothing more than my daughter's first cries, still running by accident, catching the truth my father never meant for anyone to hear. I think about how close he came to succeeding, how thin the line actually was between a family tragedy averted and one that would have devastated all of us permanently. He thought grief justified almost anything, so long as the ending looked like love from a distance. I learned, in the space of that single terrifying week, that real love asks first. It doesn't wait for you to wake up confused and sign away before explaining itself. Nora is 7 months old now, healthy, loud, entirely unaware of the week her family nearly came apart around her before she was even old enough to hold her own head up. Someday, when she's older, I may tell her this story, not to punish her grandfather further, but because I think she deserves to understand, eventually, exactly how hard her mother fought to make sure she grew up exactly where she belonged. If this story made you think about what you would do when family crosses the one line that should never be crossed, tell me in the comments. Would you have fought the way she did? If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Story Spark for more powerful stories about family, secrets, justice, and unexpected consequences. And remember, sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones you have to protect yourself from the hardest.